the Labour Party conference at Len today. A tumultuous week, has to be said, for the party and the Miliband brothers. Joining me to assess it, Mehdi Hasan. Mehdi is from the New Statesman, and Quentin from the Daily Mail. Let's go to you first of all, Quentin. Ed Miliband, what do you think?
Well, this has undoubtedly been a week of melodrama, and that has its good aspects and its bad aspects for the Labour Party. The good aspect is that the public cannot but have noticed the fratricide that has just happened. I mean, it has been gripping on a simply human level, so people will actually now know who Ed Miliband is. I'm not sure they would have done before. The bad thing for Labour might be that people think, ooh, he's not a man to trust if he does it in his own brother. But I think as far as Ed Miliband's personality goes, on the political side, we have to say that he is still a jelly that has barely begun to set. And we haven't heard anything really about the policy side. We haven't really learned much about his political view of the world. So it's all to play for as far as the policy goes. As far as his actual character goes, perhaps we just think he's quite ruthless.
I love that description, a jelly that has hardly begun to set. Mehdi Hasan, what do you think?
Well, I've always quite liked jelly, and I quite like Ed Miliband. So I think I share Quentin's point that it's been a good and a bad week for Labour. It's good that they've got a new leader. I think a couple of days ago they were actually leading in the polls for the first time in 3 years. Ed Miliband clearly is delighted to be a leader, very ambitious man, ruthless man, but you see the downside is he had to kind of knife his brother in order to get the job, as a lot of people seem to be pointing out. The bad side of it really is that this David Miliband melodrama has taken over the week. David said at the weekend, this will be Ed's week, not my week. Unfortunately, through his decisions, it's actually been mostly his week. And I wish he'd gone at the weekend. I wish he'd said on Sunday morning or Monday morning, look, I'm out of here.
Well, could I ask you why you think he didn't do that at the weekend? Was the lip-reading fiasco, was that the final straw, do you think?
No, I think he'd already probably made up his mind before then. I think he was genuinely torn. There was a lot of pressure from a lot of Blairites.
Well, if he had made up his mind, why didn't he go at the weekend?
He probably hadn't made up his mind at that stage. He was probably leaning towards it. He probably hadn't gotten over the shock of being beaten by his younger brother by 1.3%. And he was under a lot of pressure from a lot of people. I was in Manchester, a lot of Blairites, a lot of supporters of David Miliband saying he's got to stay at the top. They were urging him to stay. And then by Monday he'd probably decided he was going to go, but he couldn't go so quickly.
I'd like to get your perspective, Quentin, on the lip-reading gate business.
Well, I think Mehdi's probably right. I think Miliband D had probably decided before then to go. But that sort of thing happens at party conferences. It happens when people get tired, when people are plotting too much. I mean, these conferences are extraordinarily bitchy-doos. There's too much drinking goes on. I'm not saying by Miliband particularly, but people get so fraught. And what Ed Miliband now has to do, he has to get away from that terribly vexed, sort of all the plotting of a party conference, and needs to calm down a bit. I mean, last night I saw him giving some interviews all about his religious beliefs and his marriage and all that. He really needs to step back from that and present a slightly calmer, more mature, adult personality, I think. He just needs to get out of Manchester and calm down, dear.
I think Quentin's got a point. I think, look, in 5 years' time in 2015, when the next general election is held under this fixed-term parliament, nobody will remember any of this. Nobody will remember even what Ed Miliband said in his first conference speech. I certainly don't remember what Gordon Brown or Tony Blair said in their first speeches. So I think this is a kind of short-term media obsession. I think David's done the right thing, David Miliband, in walking away. Had he stayed, you'd have had more lip-reading gates. You would have had journalists like me and you, Eamonn and Quentin, watching every facial tick in every Ed Miliband speech to see, did David like it? Did David approve? Is David on the same page? Okay. So it's good that he's good that he's gone.
Talking about
a gracious move to quote
Talking
Ed.
about David's, it's the other David Cameron, next week. Are you looking forward to that?
I am looking forward to that. David Cameron's been away from the fray for good reasons and bad. He had a baby, plus his father sadly died, and Nick Clegg was holding the fort, etc. We had the Lib Dem conference. Feels like we haven't seen David Cameron in a while. It's good for Cameron. Cameron likes the idea of being this presidential figure above the fray while others fight it out, and Labour have indulged it by attacking the Lib Dems, not the Tories, for the last 4 months. But Ed Miliband in his speech didn't mention the Lib Dems, didn't mention Clegg. He went after Mr Cameron. So it should be very interesting as politics returns to semi-normal.
And Quentin, what do you think next week with the Tories?
I think they'll be aiming for a sense of serenity. Cameron himself will be trying to sort of stand above all this terrible brotherly squabbling that we've been having in recent days. But there's some interesting stuff going on. This business about the defence budget, and Liam Fox writing a letter to the Prime Minister saying, look, we've got to go worry about defence cuts. That's got a lot of mileage in it, I would have thought. And the other thing we'll be looking out for next week is cross-patch comments about the Liberal Democrats. On the Tory fringe, there'll be a lot of groaning and griping about the Lib Dems, so that should provide us with a bit of sport.
Quentin, thank you very much indeed for your sport this morning. Mehdi, thank you very much indeed as well. We move to medical matters, and doctors have used stem cells to help repair a woman's leg, which was broken in a hit-and-run accident. Surgeons had originally feared that Diane Stuttard's leg would have to be amputated, but now they've used a new technique to fix her bones together. This exclusive report from our health correspondent, Thomas Moore.
Simple thing, we have got a number of struts on it.
The scars from 11 operations pockmarked Diane Stuttard's leg.